you may be called privileged if you take responsibility for your own happiness. Why do you think there's been such a strong correlation there built where people just perceive, okay, if that person feels like they have a good life or if they feel like they're happy, then there must be some intrinsic reason for that, or there must be some privileged reason why, instead of like, no, like I've done the work to create my happiness.
Yes, yes. And I grew up around this thought loop just like all of us did. And so, what got me out of this thought loop is I read a lot of history and a lot of biography. And everyone that you think of today who was like some great figure, when you read about their life, you see how really horrible suffering was in their life. So, you may think, oh, these great historical figures, they were successful because they must have had more nurturing and more advantages and all the cliches we've heard. But in fact, they pushed through horrible, horrible obstacles. And so they got some traction, but also lots of suffering. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Um, Thomas Jefferson, his wife died in childbirth, and seven of his eight children, six or seven of his children died before they grew up and had children. So he just watched everybody die. Okay. George Washington, he had a stepson who was very spoiled in the ways that I've mentioned. And he did everything to help this stepson, but he was still a total alcoholic. And like then, just like now, some young people, not only were they alcoholic, but the popular bad habit at the time was gambling. And people from affluent families would just gamble away all the family's money and borrow money and gamble it. When this is literally true, when Washington signed the Treaty of Yorktown that gained America independence, he went right from signing that treaty to his stepson's funeral because his stepson drank himself to death after like decades of trying to rescue the kid. So those are just some examples. And John Adams, the second president of the United States, yeah, Jefferson was the third, so the second. So now we're three for three. His son was alcoholic and his grandson was alcoholic, and they were very prominent. They had all kinds of titles and everything, but they were alcoholic.
David Senra, he's the host of the Founders Podcast, and he does a lot of work where he just does a deep dive into history's greatest leaders, and he compiled a list of like what are the top traits of history's greatest. And the number one thing on the list was that he said excellence is the capacity to take pain. Like out of everything that was on the list, like there was great stuff like, growth mindset and all this stuff. But like the number one thing that he correlated between like history's greatest leaders is like they all had an excellent capacity to be able to take pain, whether that's literal physical pain or some type of like mental stress that like came through their work. And I think that builds on this point nicely where it's like these things aren't just naturally given to us, or they're not just like we don't just naturally have them, or we're just not naturally wired to be this way, but it's like it's that constant work that takes time.
Yes, yes. And if I could give you a couple of more examples of just how, yeah, Sigmund Freud. So, when I grew up, like he was like the icon of psychology. And so I thought, oh, he was so lucky he had this good life. They had like a club of everybody who agreed with this new theory. And I wish I had a nice little club of people. We've had such a nice conversation. I would love to have a club of people who got it like you. And why don't I have that? And what's wrong with my life? And where did everything go wrong? Blah, 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 blah. Then during COVID, I read 12 biographies of Sigmund Freud. And basically I learned that this group that he was linked to, they were at each other's throat all the time.